Welcome to my channel. Before watching the video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. The Texas sun had been burning over Dust Creek since dawn, its relentless heat pressing down on the tiny frontier town like an iron hand. Wooden buildings baked in the scorching light, their peeling paint curling at the edges. Dust from the dry plains drifted through the streets, carried by slow, lazy gusts of wind that did nothing to ease the suffocating air. By mid-afternoon, the faint ringing of horseshoes against dry dirt and the creaking of wagon wheels were drowned out by the muffled hum of voices spilling from the Silver Spur Saloon, the heart of the town's restless energy. Inside, the air was no cooler, but it carried its own kind of relief. The soft twang of a banjo played lazily in the corner, the clink of whiskey glasses, the low rumble of men talking over poker games. Tobacco smoke hung heavy, swirling lazily near the ceiling. Behind the polished oak counter, Clara Mae Dawson moved with practiced grace, wiping down glasses and sliding drinks across the bar with an easy flick of her wrist. At 22, she'd been working at the Silver Spur for nearly 5 years, ever since her father had been killed in a cattle drive accident and her mother had passed from fever shortly after. She had the kind of beauty that wasn't loud but unforgettable, a cascade of chestnut brown hair tied loosely at the nape of her neck, sharp green eyes that saw more than she ever let on, and a stubbornness that could match any gunslinger in Texas. Folks said Clara Mae had the kind of look that made Trouble think twice. But Trouble, she knew, didn't care much for looks. As she leaned across the counter to set a bottle in front of a grizzled ranch hand, Silas Boone, the saloon owner, came stomping down the stairs from his office above. Silas was a heavy-set man in his late 50s, with a booming voice and a permanent scowl carved deep into his weathered face. "Clara," he barked, his voice carrying over the noise, "didn't I tell you to water down the whiskey for the cowhands? Ain't no profit in letting 'em drink it straight." Clara didn't even glance up as she wiped the bar. "I did, Silas. That's just a different bottle." Silas grunted, unconvinced but unwilling to argue further. Instead, he leaned in close, lowering his voice. "You hear the talk around town?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "Which talk?" "There's always talk. This ain't like the usual gossip," Silas said grimly, his hand gripping the edge of the counter. "Word is the black vultures were spotted down by Red Rock Canyon last night. 12 of them. Meanest bunch of gunslicks west of the Pecos. Folks say they're headed this way." The name hung in the air like the stillness before a storm. Clara stilled for just a heartbeat before setting the glass down. "Could just be rumors." Silas shook his head. "Ain't no rumor when 3 different writers tell the same tale. If they come ridden in here, you keep your head down, hear me? Don't serve 'em. Don't talk to 'em. Hell, don't even look at 'em." Clara smirked faintly, though her heart gave a nervous thump. "And what happens if they walk through that door and I ignore them? They seem like the kind who'd take offense." "They're the kind who'll shoot first and laugh while you bleed," Silas muttered, running a hand over his thinning hair. "Sheriff Briggs won't stand a chance if they decide to make trouble. Ain't a man in this town fast enough to match Jebediah Black Jack Crow." Clara knew the name well. Everyone did. Black Jack Crow, the leader of the Black Vultures. Wanted in 3 states, rumored to have killed a dozen lawmen and twice as many outlaws. Stories said he shot his own brother in the back once, just for reaching for the same bottle of whiskey. Nobody crossed him and lived. Before Clara could answer, the saloon doors creaked open and Sam Dawson, her 16-year-old brother, burst in, nearly tripping over his boots. "Clara," he panted, his cheeks flushed and his straw-colored hair sticking to his forehead. "I just came from the marshal's post. Folks are saying the vultures are camped only 5 miles south of town." The poker players nearby froze mid-hand. A whiskey glass slipped from someone's fingers and shattered against the floor. Conversations died instantly, and for a moment, the only sound in the silver spur was the low, haunting hum of the banjo. Silas cursed under his breath. Damn it all. If they're that close, we ain't got much time. He jabbed a finger at Clara. You hear me, girl? If they ride in here, you do not under any circumstance serve those devils. Understand? Clara hesitated, looking around at the nervous faces of the regulars. She saw fear etched into every line, every glance. Dust Creek had lived under the shadow of men like the black vultures for too long, and she was tired of it. I understand, she said finally. Though her tone carried more steel than submission. Sam slid onto a stool beside her, his young face pale. What do we do, Clara? If they come here, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. We do what we always do, Sammy. We keep our heads, stay sharp, and hope trouble rides past. But deep down, Clara Mae Dawson knew better. Trouble had a way of finding Dust Creek, and this time it was riding 12 strong. Outside, the sun dipped lower, bleeding orange and red across the horizon. Somewhere far off, a lonely coyote cried, and the wind shifted just enough to carry the faintest sound of distant hoofbeats. Clara's hand stilled on the bar rag as she turned toward the saloon doors, her green eyes narrowing. Something told her the quiet days of Dust Creek were about to end. The evening settled over Dust Creek like a heavy blanket. The heat of the day still clung to the air, but a faint breeze rolled down from the mesas, carrying with it a sound that made the town's blood run cold. HOOFBATS. Slow at first, distant, then louder. 12 of them. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, the whole town knew. The black vultures had arrived. Inside the Silver Spur Saloon, the air was thick with tension. The card players who'd once been bickering over poker pots now sat in silence, their hands frozen above the green felt table. The banjo player in the corner plucked one last uncertain note, then laid his instrument down, his fingers trembling. Even Silas Boone, usually loud and commanding, stood pale and quiet behind the bar, his jaw tight and his hand wrapped around the butt of a shotgun he kept beneath the counter. But Clara Mae Dawson wasn't holding a gun. She stood tall behind the bar, her chestnut hair tied back neatly, her green eyes fixed on the swinging doors. She could hear the hoofbeats clearer now, steady, deliberate, like war drums rolling closer with each passing second. Beside her, Sam Dawson shifted nervously. "Clara," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "maybe we should close up. Lock the doors." Clara shook her head slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Won't make a bit of difference, Sammy. Men like them don't knock." The saloon doors creaked open, and for the briefest moment, time stopped. The first man stepped inside, tall and lean, dressed head to toe in black. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed most of his face, but the faint lamplight revealed the sharp line of his jaw and a thin, cruel smile playing at his lips. His long black duster coat swayed gently as he moved, spurs clinking softly with each step. This was Jebediah Blackjack Crow. Clara had never seen him before, but she knew it instantly. His reputation had preceded him, carried like ghost. Stories through every saloon, jailhouse, and campfire from Texas to New Mexico. There was something about the way he walked, like the whole room belonged to him the moment he entered. His cold gray eyes scanned the saloon, assessing every man, every exit, every weapon. Before locking briefly on Clara. Behind him, 11 more riders filed in, each as rough and dangerous looking as rattlesnakes coiled in the desert sun. Ezekiel. Zeke. Kane came next. Crow's right-hand man, a barrel-chested brute with a shaved head and scars crisscrossing his jawline. Cole Maddox, a wiry sharpshooter with a cocky grin and a habit of spinning his revolver like it was part of his hand. Jesse Pike, the youngest of the bunch, no older than 19 but with a dead look in his eyes that made him seem older. Tom Hollow Eyes Grady, known for the pitch-black void of his stare, followed silently, his boots leaving heavy prints in the sawdust-strewn floor. The rest of the gang fanned out across the saloon, their spurs scraping, boots thudding, and gun belts jangling. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared to. Finally, Black Jack stepped forward, placing both gloved hands on the polished oak bar. His voice was smooth, deep, and laced with quiet menace. "Evenin', darlin'," he drawled, his gaze fixed squarely on Clara. "Pour us a drink." Clara's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't move. Not yet. From the corner of her eye, she saw Silas Boone subtly shake his head, his expression pleading. Silas had warned her not to serve them. But refusing men like the Black Vultures could be more dangerous than giving them what they wanted. Clara swallowed hard and forced her voice steady. "Whiskey?" Black Jack smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "The good kind. Not the watered-down swill you give the cowhands." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the gang behind him, but their hands never strayed far from their gun belts. Clara reached for the top shelf, bottled the expensive kind Silas kept for rich cattle barons passing through, and poured 12 glasses, her hand steady despite the pounding of her heart. One by one, the vultures took their drinks, but they didn't sit. They stayed standing, looming like shadows over the trembling townsfolk. Black Jack raised his glass, glancing briefly at the silent saloon before turning his cold gray eyes back to Clara. "Reckon you're the bravest soul in this town, darlin'," he said softly. "Everyone else scatters like scared rabbits the moment we ride in. But you," he paused, his gaze sharp as a knife's edge, "you look a man square in the eye and pour his drink." Clara said nothing, only met his stare evenly. Behind him, Zeke Kane leaned close and muttered something, his voice low and rough. Black Jack's expression darkened, and he straightened slowly, resting one hand casually on the handle of his Colt revolver. He turned his head just enough to address the room. "I heard tell this here saloon's got a rule about who it serves. That true?" Silas Boone stiffened, beads of sweat rolling down his temple. "Ain't no rule, Mr. Crow," he said quickly, forcing a shaky smile. "We serve everyone." "Black?" Jack's gaze lingered on Silas for an uncomfortably long moment before he nodded slightly. "Good. Be a shame if I had to burn the place down." The tension in the room thickened, stretching like a taut rope ready to snap. Clara slid the bottle closer, forcing herself to breathe evenly. "We got plenty more if you're thirsty." Black Jack's eyes glimmered with faint amusement. Now that's hospitality. But beneath the surface, Clara sensed danger coiling tighter with every passing second. These men weren't here just for drinks. There was purpose in their silence, weight in their presence. As she refilled Black Jack's glass, her sharp ears caught fragments of a hushed conversation behind him. Zeke Kane leaned toward Cole Maddox, his gravelly voice low but urgent. "Midnight, Wells Fargo coach. Gold running north." Clara's pulse quickened. They weren't just passing through. They were here for something big, something that could set the whole town ablaze before the night was over. But before she could process it, Black Jack leaned forward suddenly, close enough that she could smell the faint mix of whiskey and gunpowder on his breath. "Darlin'," he said softly, almost kindly, "why don't you keep pouring? Tonight's gonna be a long one." Outside, the hoofbeats had stopped. The night had grown unnaturally still, as though the whole of Dust Creek was holding its breath. Inside the Silver Spur, 12 feared gunslingers now drank in silence, their shadows stretching long under the dim lamplight. And Clara May Dawson realized that trouble hadn't just come to town, it had walked straight through her doors. The low lamplight flickered against the stained walls of the Silver Spur Saloon, throwing long, shifting shadows across the room. Outside, night had settled over Dust Creek, cloaking the town in a tense silence. Crickets chirped faintly somewhere. In the distance, but even nature seemed to hold its breath. Inside, the silence was heavier than gun smoke. The black vultures sat sprawled across the saloon, drinking whiskey like water, their boots muddy, their spurs clinking softly whenever they shifted. 12 feared gunslingers, each one dangerous enough alone, but together? They were a storm no sheriff west of the Pecos could face head-on. Behind the polished oak bar, Clara Mae Dawson wiped down the counter with steady hands. Though her heart pounded like a war drum in her chest, she'd grown up in Dust Creek. She'd seen bar fights turn bloody, seen men shot dead in the dirt over a crook hand of cards. But this was different. These men weren't here for whiskey. She knew it in her bones. Her sharp green eyes drifted over the room, studying them the way a hunter studies a pack of wolves. Black Jack Crow, their leader, sat in the center table with his back to the wall, one long leg stretched lazily under the table, his gloved hand resting on the handle of his Colt. The lamplight glinted off the silver spurs on his boots, off the polished metal of the revolver at his hip. Beside him, Ezekiel Zeke Kane, a mountain of a man, leaned in close, his scarred jaw twitching as he muttered something under his breath. Clara tilted her head slightly, pretending to polish a glass as she strained to listen. Coach rolls through round midnight. Zeke's gravelly voice rumbled low, nearly drowned out by the clink of whiskey glasses. Wells Fargo run. Gold enough to buy out half-o Texas. Clara's breath caught gold. She turned slightly, sliding another glass along the bar without looking, careful to keep her expression neutral. Across from Zeke, Cole Maddox grinned his usual cocky grin, twirling his revolver on one finger as he whispered back, "Sheriff's boys won't stand a chance. 2 rifles on the ridge, rest of us down by the creek bed. Stage'll never see us comin'." Clara's hand stilled on the glass. They were planning an ambush, and worse, the Wells Fargo stagecoach always passed through Dust Creek's North Road, right at the edge of town. If a gunfight broke out there, innocent people could get caught in the crossfire. She felt a cold wave of dread wash over her, but she forced her breath steady and glanced toward the far end of the bar where Sam Dawson, her 16-year-old brother, stood nervously drying mugs. His straw-colored hair stuck to his forehead, and his brown eyes darted anxiously between the gang members. Clara caught his gaze, giving the smallest nod. Sam frowned but understood her meaning instantly. A plan began to form in her mind, dangerous, desperate, but the only chance they had. She leaned over the bar, pretending to fetch a bottle from the lower shelf, and whispered, just loud enough for Sam to hear, "Go to Sheriff Elijah Briggs. Tell him the vultures are planning to rob the coach tonight. Hurry." Sam hesitated, his young face pale. "Clara, what if they see me?" "Just go," she whispered sharply, slipping a folded napkin into his hand. "Through the back door." Quiet as a shadow. Sam gave a nervous nod, tucking the note into his vest before slipping off the stool and moving toward the rear hallway. Clara straightened quickly, forcing a smile as she turned back toward the bar, just in time to see Jesse Pike, the youngest of the vultures, lean against a post near the back door, his cold blue eyes following Sam. Her blood ran cold. Jesse's lips curved into a slow, unsettling grin as he pushed off the post, his spurs jingling softly. He moved like a rattlesnake, uncoiling, casual but deadly. Clara's mind raced. If Jesse followed Sam, her brother wouldn't make it halfway to the sheriff before getting a bullet in his back. She grabbed a glass from the shelf and slammed it down on the bar loud enough to draw Jesse's attention. "Hey, Cowboy," she called, forcing a teasing lilt into her voice. "You gonna stare holes in the wall, or you want another drink?" Jesse paused mid-step, his eyes narrowing at her interruption. Slowly he turned back toward the bar. "Think I'll take that drink," he muttered, sauntering over with that eerie calmness only killers had. Clara smiled faintly, hiding the tremor in her hands as she poured him a glass. All the while praying Sam slipped out unnoticed. Black Jack Crow, still seated at the center table, leaned back in his chair, his sharp gray eyes locking on Clara. "You got sand, darling," he drawled lazily. "Most folks don't even breathe loud when we ride in. But you," he tilted his head slightly, "you talk to us like we're just men." Clara met his gaze evenly, forcing calm into her voice. "That's 'cause you're standing in my saloon. And in my saloon, everyone gets treated the same long as they keep their guns holstered." For a moment, silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Then, to everyone's surprise, Black Jack chuckled softly and raised his glass in a mocking toast. "Well then," he said, his voice smooth as silk but sharp as broken glass, "here's to equal treatment." Around him, the vultures laughed, a low, dangerous sound that rolled through the room like distant thunder. Clara forced herself to smile faintly, but inside she felt the weight of every passing second. If Sam didn't make it to Sheriff Briggs, soon Dust Creek was going to drown in blood before sunrise. Outside, the night grew darker and the desert wind howled faintly through the empty streets. Somewhere in the distance, an owl screeched. Its mournful cry carried across the plains dot inside the saloon. The whiskey flowed, the whispers deepened, and the noose around Dust Creek tightened. Clara Mae Dawson didn't know it yet, but she had just set herself and the entire town on a collision course with 12 feared gunslingers, and there was no turning back. The lamps in the Silver Spur Saloon burned low, their golden light casting deep, restless shadows across the floorboards. The whiskey fumes hung heavy in the air, mingling with tobacco smoke and the quiet tension that sat like a weight on everyone's shoulders. Outside, Dust Creek lay swallowed by darkness, the desert winds whispering faintly through empty streets. But inside the saloon, the storm hadn't broken yet. It waited, coiled tight. Ready to strike. At the center of it all sat Jebediah, Black Jack Crow, his gloved hand resting casually on the butt of his Colt, his cold gray eyes half-lidded but watchful. Around him lounged his gang, the Black Vultures 11 of the deadliest guns in the territory. Drinking slow and speaking quieter still, behind the bar, Clara Mae Dawson forced herself to breathe evenly, her sharp green eyes fixed on the table. Where Black Jack sat with Ezekiel Zeke, Kane, and Cole Maddox, she'd overheard enough to know their plan. An ambush on the Wells Fargo stagecoach passing north of town at midnight. Gold enough to set fire to half of Texas. And enough gunfire to burn Dust Creek off the map. But if the sheriff didn't get her message in time, if Sam didn't make it. Clara clenched her jaw and kept her hands busy polishing glasses she didn't need to clean. Pretending normalcy was the only shield she had. Suddenly, Zeke Kane slammed his glass down hard enough to rattle the bar. His scarred jaw twitched as he leaned close to Black Jack. "Boss," he muttered low, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Girl's too quiet, eyes sharp as a hawk. Reckon she heard something she shouldn't." Clara's stomach dropped, but she didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Black Jack leaned back slowly, his chair creaking under his weight. His gaze slid lazily from Zeke to Clara, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he rose to his feet. The saloon seemed to shrink around him as he crossed the room, boots thudding softly against the wooden floorboards. Every poker hand froze mid-deal. The banjo player in the corner stilled his fingers. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Black Jack stopped at the bar, placing both gloved hands flat on the counter, leaning just close enough that Clara could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. "You been listening to things that ain't your business, darlin'?" he asked, his voice low, smooth, and dangerous. Clara met his gaze evenly, forcing her voice calm despite the pounding of her heart. "I pour drinks, Mr. Crow, not secrets." For a long, tense moment, neither moved. Then, to her surprise, Black Jack chuckled softly, the sound low and humorless. He leaned in even closer, his cold gray eyes narrowing. "See, I like you," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Got grit, but grit don't keep folks alive when they get in my way." Behind him, Zeke shifted, resting one heavy hand on the handle of his rifle. Clara took a slow breath, steadying herself. If she stayed silent, they'd get suspicious. If she lied badly, they'd know dot, so she gambled. "You're planning something," she said quietly, her voice sharp but controlled. "Something big. You need this town distracted, don't you?" Zeke's head snapped toward her, his scarred face darkening with fury. "Boss, Black Jack raised a single hand, silencing him without a word. His cold gaze never left Clara's face. Finally, after a long silence, he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried more threat than kindness. "Sharp girl," he drawled. "Maybe too sharp for your own good." Clara swallowed, keeping her expression steady even as dread curled in her stomach. "If you hurt this town, the sheriff won't just come for you. There'll be deputies, marshals, maybe even rangers." Black Jack's chuckle cut her off, low and menacing. "Darlin', I've killed 3 rangers. You think I'm worried about Briggs and his little badge?" Clara forced herself to lean forward, lowering her voice to a whisper only he could hear. "Maybe you should be. Sheriff Briggs might not scare you, but his men will make it bloody. You want clean work tonight? No distractions?" Black Jack's brows furrowed faintly, interest flickering in his cold gray eyes. "Go on. You keep me and my brother safe," Clara said, her voice barely above breath. "And I'll keep the sheriff out of your way." Zeke slammed his palm down on the table behind them. "Boss knows she's playing you," but Black Jack didn't turn. He just stared at Clara, unreadable, weighing her words like a man measuring a coin in his palm. Finally, he leaned back slightly, a slow grin spreading across his lips. "You got sand, darlin'," he said softly. "I'll give you that. But make no mistake, if you double-cross me, I won't kill you quick. You understand?" Clara nodded once, holding his gaze steady. Black Jack straightened, turning to Zeke. "Leave her be. She's useful." Zeke gritted, his teeth but obeyed, though his glare burned into Clara like a brand. For the next hour, the saloon hummed with a false calm. The vultures drank, whispered, and planned. Clara poured their drinks and smiled faintly when spoken to, her face calm, her hands steady. Inside, though, she was already weaving a different plan entirely. If Black Jack thought she'd help him, he was wrong. If Zeke thought she'd stay quiet out of fear, he didn't know her. Clara Mae Dawson wasn't just going to protect herself and Sam. She was going to stop them somehow outside. The wind held low across the plains. The moon climbed higher, silvering the rooftops of Dust Creek in cold light. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped once and fell silent inside the silver spur. A deal had been struck, one made in shadows and whiskey, sealed with unspoken threats. Clara Mae had just shaken hands with the devil and midnight was coming fast. The night had fallen over Dusty Creek. But it was no ordinary night. The blood moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie crimson glow across the desert plains. The soft whistling of the wind carried with it a sense of foreboding, as though the land itself knew that something monumental was about to happen. Inside Lila McCoy's saloon, the tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. Lila stood behind the polished wooden bar, her trembling fingers resting on the edge as she stared at the empty street beyond the swinging doors. The faint creak of the shutters outside mixed with the low rumble of distant thunder, though there wasn't a cloud in sight. Tonight was the night everything would change. The Black Vultures, led by the ruthless Cole Travers, had sent word. They were coming at midnight to reclaim Dusty Creek, to take back control from the townfolk and remind everyone who ruled these lands. Cole's men weren't just killers. They were monsters in human skin, 12 gunslingers with reputations, carved in blood and fear. No one ever stood against them and lived to tell the tale. But tonight, for the first time, someone would. Layla glanced at the small group gathered around the central poker table. The 12 feared gunslingers she had let into her saloon. 3 nights ago, the ones the whole town had dreaded were no longer enemies. Against all odds, they were now allies, bound by a fragile, uneasy truce forged over shared hatred of Cole. Travers and his black vultures. There was Silas Kane, a silent killer whose quick draw had earned him the nickname Ghost Hand. He sat with his back against the wall, spinning his revolver with casual grace. Next to him, Jonah Pike, once Cole's right-hand man, nursed a glass of whiskey and a haunted look in his pale blue eyes. There was Finn Doolin, a wiry Irish sharpshooter who never missed a shot, and Ezekiel Zeke Crow, a towering brute of a man who'd broken more bones than anyone dared count. Each of the 12 had their reasons for turning against Cole, but none of them had illusions. This alliance might end with every one of them dead. The clock ticked closer to midnight. You sure about this, Lila? Jonah finally broke the silence, his voice low and rough like gravel dragged across stone. Cole ain't a man you bluff against. He'll burn this whole town just to get at us. Lila met his gaze, her green eyes steady despite the pounding. Of her heart, I'm sure, she said softly. This isn't just about the saloon anymore. He's bled Dusty Creek dry for too long. If we don't stop him tonight, there won't be a town left by sunrise. Silas gave a faint, humorless smile. She's got grit, I'll give her that. But grit don't stop bullets. Lila's jaw tightened. No, but maybe a plan will. She unfolded a hand-drawn map of Dusty Creek onto the poker table, her finger tracing the back alley that ran behind the saloon. Cole's men will come straight down Main Street, they always do. That's where they're strongest, where they want to make a show of it. But the rooftops here, she tapped the shaded outline, give us a clean shot. Jonah, Finnule, be up there. Take out the first wave before they even reach the doors. Jonah raised an eyebrow. You're making me a sniper now? You're the only one who knows how Cole thinks, she countered. If anyone can predict his moves, it's you. Finn grinned, slapping Jonah's back. Don't worry, mate. I'll make sure you don't miss. Lila turned to Zeke next. You and Silas will hold the saloon entrance. If they make it past the crossfire, they'll bottleneck at the door. That's where we'll slow them down. Silas cracked his knuckles, his expression unreadable. Sounds messy. It will be, she admitted. And you? Zeke asked, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. I'll be inside, she said, her tone unwavering. This is my place. If Cole makes it through all of you, he'll find me waiting. The room went silent at that. None of them questioned her resolve. Outside, the desert was drowning in silence, the kind of silence that came before storms and death. Then, the sound of hoofbeats shattered it. 12 black vultures rode into Dusty Creek, their silhouettes outlined by the crimson light of the blood moon. At their head was Cole Travers himself, his black duster coat trailing behind him, his wide-brimmed hat casting his scarred face into shadow. His reputation preceded him, a man who'd killed over 50 men and smiled while doing it. From her vantage point behind the saloon doors, Lila could see the silver glint of his revolvers. Twin Colts known only as Judgment and Mercy. Cole was known for using both, one for killing fast, the other for killing slow. Lila McCoy. His voice thundered across the empty street, echoing against the wooden facades of the town. You've been playing games, darlin'. Let my men inside your saloon, thinking you could outfox me. Lila didn't answer. You know how this ends, Cole called out again. Come out, hand over the traitors, and maybe I'll let the good people of Dusty Creek keep their miserable lives. Silas stepped to the window and spat. "That bastard's got a tongue slicker than snake oil." "Quiet," Leela hissed. "Wait for the signal." Cole and his riders drew closer, the sound of creaking leather and jingling spurs carrying through the heavy night air. Lila raised her hand slowly, her heart hammering. Jonah and Finn were already in position on the rooftops, rifles aimed. Zeke and Silas flanked the saloon doors, revolvers ready. When Cole's lead rider crossed the chalk mark Lila had scratched into the dirt earlier, she dropped her hand, a deafening crack split the night as Jonah and Finn opened fire. 2 riders fell instantly, tumbling from their saddles like rag dolls. Chaos erupted. The remaining black vultures dove for cover, firing wildly into the shadows. Bullets shattered windows, splintered wood, and sent glass raining across the saloon floor. Inside, the 12 gunslingers unleashed hell. Silas' revolver sang death, each shot precise and merciless. Zeke charged into the doorway like a human barricade, his booming shotgun blasts forcing Cole's men back. Lila crouched behind the bar, reloading Jonah's spare rifle, passing it up through the hatch to Finn on the rooftop. Her hands shook, but her aim was steady. When she took her first shot, one more vulture fell, his scream cut short. Cole himself remained calm amid the carnage, striding forward like death incarnate, his twin revolvers spitting fire and fury. He moved with the grace of a predator, each step measured, each shot lethal. The fight was far from over, but one thing had become clear: this wasn't just a battle for Dusty Creek. It was a reckoning years in the making, and before dawn, only one side would walk away alive. Lila knew one thing with certainty as she chambered her next round and ducked behind the bar. The blood moon demanded blood. The night hung heavy over Dry Creek like an unspoken threat, thick with gun smoke and the bitter smell of spilled whiskey. Inside the Silver Star Saloon, the air was tense enough to choke on. Shadows danced on the walls from flickering lanterns, and the faint creak of the swinging doors marked every subtle shift in the silence. What had started as a gamble, a saloon girl daring to let 12 of the most feared gunslingers in the Fenva West drink under her roof, had spiraled into something deeper, something dangerous. Clara Dawson stood behind the polished bar, her trembling fingers curled around a damp rag she kept wringing, though there was no spill to clean. Her once steady eyes, sharp and unshakable when she'd faced outlaws before, now wavered between fear and defiance. Across the saloon, 12 men sat scattered among the round wooden tables, their guns holstered, but close enough to draw in a heartbeat. Each bore a different face of danger-scarred, weathered, merciless. Colt McGraw, their leader, leaned back in his chair, boots propped lazily on the table, chewing on a toothpick with an ease that belied the tension he carried. "You've got guts, Miss Dawson," Colt said, voice smooth as aged whiskey but sharp enough to cut glass. "Not every lady would open her doors to us, knowing what kind of heat follows." Clara's throat tightened, but she didn't falter. "I didn't open my doors for you," she said, chin tilting up. "I open them for my people. This saloon's the heart of Dry Creek, and I'll be damned if I let any one lawman or outlaw burn it to the ground." Her voice carried through the quiet like a shot, drawing every pair of steely eyes to her. Even the creaking of the floorboards seemed to stop for a moment, but the silence didn't last long. A single gunshot shattered it, echoing like thunder through the walls. The swinging doors burst open, and Sheriff Wade Harlow stormed in with half a dozen deputies at his back. Dust clung to their coats, and their revolvers gleamed beneath the lantern light. "McGraw!" Wade's voice was a bark. "You and your boys step away from the tables. This ends tonight." Colt didn't move. He didn't even blink. Instead, he slowly lowered his boots from the table and let the toothpick fall to the floor. "Sheriff," Colt drawled, his voice dripping with mock respect, "always a pleasure. But you're walking into a room where you ain't welcome. The gunslinger's hands hovered dangerously close to their holsters. Clara's heart pounded so hard it hurt. She could almost hear it louder than the ticking of the clock on the far wall. One wrong word, one twitch of a trigger finger, and the silver star would be bathed in blood. "Colt," she said softly, stepping out from behind the bar, her skirts brushing the sawdust-strewn floor. "Don't do this. Not here." He looked at her, his icy blue eyes locking with hers. For a moment, Clara thought she saw something buried deep there, weariness, maybe even regret, but it was gone as quick as a desert mirage. "You should have picked a safer business." "Darlin'," Colt said quietly, "the sheriff's deputies." Fanned out, guns drawn. Then chaos erupted. The first shot came from nowhere, but it was enough to ignite the storm. Gunfire roared, glass shattered, and men dove for cover behind overturned tables. The air filled with smoke and screams, every muzzle flash painting the saloon in brief, violent light. Clara ducked behind the bar, her breath ragged. Her ears rang with each explosion of gunfire, and splinters rained down as bullets tore into the counter inches from her face. She clutched the sawed-off shotgun hidden beneath the counter, the one she swore she'd never use. Then she saw him. One of Colt's men, a towering brute named Eli Bear Haskins, was crouched by the staircase, reloading his rifle, ready to take aim at the sheriff from behind. Without thinking, Clara rose, braced the shotgun, and fired. The blast thundered through the saloon. Bear went down hard, his rifle clattering across the floorboards. The room froze for a split second as every eye turned to her. Clara, breath heaving, lowered the shotgun but didn't drop it. Smoke curled from the barrel. Colt stared at her with something unreadable, part fury, part grudging respect. Outside, thunder rumbled as if the heavens themselves disapproved. By the time the shooting stopped, 3 deputies lay wounded, 2 gunslingers were dead, and blood stained the wooden floor. The survivors stood breathing hard, the acrid smell of powder hanging heavy in the air. Colt wiped a smear of blood from his cheek and holstered his pistol. He stepped toward Clara slowly, boots thudding on the boards. "You're something else." "Clara Dawson," he said, voice low, almost dangerous. "I came here thinking I'd run this town, but I reckon this saloon belongs to you." She didn't flinch, didn't speak. Her hands shook slightly, but her gaze never wavered. Colt tipped his hat, gave a brief nod, and motioned to the surviving gunslingers. "Boys, we're done here." And just like that, they walked out into the rain-soaked night, leaving the silver star behind. Sheriff Harlow approached Clara, his badge glinting in the dim light. "You just saved this town," he said softly, almost reluctantly. "But you've made enemies you don't even know yet." Clara set the shotgun on the bar and straightened her shoulders. "Then they'll know where to find me," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Outside, the storm broke in earnest, rain pelting the dusty streets, washing away blood and gunpowder alike. But inside the saloon, the echoes of gunfire lingered, a haunting reminder of how close they'd all come to ruin. The silver star stood tall, scarred but unbroken, much like Clara Dawson herself, and somewhere in the darkness beyond Dry Creek, Colt McGraw lit a cigarette beneath his hat's brim and muttered to his men, "This ain't over."